welcome to another episode of the Breakthrough Work podcast. I'm your host, Ravi Kumar, partner and national market leader at Connor Group. Connor Group is built for breakthroughs. We help ambitious companies tackle their most critical opportunities and challenges across IPOs, M&A, and digital transformation. On Breakthrough Work, we highlight leaders who have reshaped industries through courage, creativity, and conviction. My guest today is Lauren Maillian, entrepreneur, investor, author, board member, whose 20-year career spanned wine, venture capital, consumer brands, tech, and media. She's the best-selling author of the Path Redefined and one of LinkedIn's top voices in business. Lauren, it's such an honor to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Ravi. I think so highly of your work and all that you do at Connor Group and the entire team and the way that you all are known to help businesses through times of transformation and growth. So I am so excited to chat with you about all things breakthroughs and transformation today. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, and the pleasure is truly mine, and excited to kick things off with a question from your early days of your career, when you were the youngest self-made winery owner at the age of just 19. What drove you to leap into an industry so early, frankly, before you could even enjoy the spoils of your labor? And what did you learn from that experience?
That's a really great question. And it's funny how the answer is obviously the same from many years ago when I started, which was curiosity, right? I've been deeply curious my entire life about how businesses work and function and thrive and what makes them tick. I've always been deeply curious about the customer journey before the markets became so obsessed around the consumer. And I remember even as a little girl, I would go to restaurants and things with my dad or my mom or have shopping experiences. And even from a very young age, I would say, why isn't this done better? Or, wow, that looks like an opportunity over there. And I remember my parents always asking me from a very young age, what did I want to be when I grew up? And funny enough, my answer was I wanted to be an investment banker because that's what I
Whoa.
saw my father do. And but so much of that was wrapped up in wanting to be an owner, realizing that the power came through ownership, and that before I could even understand the concept of equity, I understood the concept of ownership. And the easiest way for me as a young child and then a young adult to understand ownership was through real estate. And I think, that's where a lot of our country creates their wealth historically. That's even globally where a lot of people create their wealth and have a majority of their holdings, or a lot of their holdings is within real estate portfolios and real estate acquisitions. And so when I was 19, I ended up purchasing a piece of property in Monticello, Virginia, in the Charlottesville region. And I didn't ask at the time many questions because the price was really good. It was an incredible opportunity. And I ended up buying this property. And then later on, figuring out how expensive it is to maintain farmland. Okay. I was a city girl who had not quite understood all of those things. I just knew price was right. Price per acre was awesome. I had to have it. So my negotiation skills were on point. My crunch the numbers on maintaining the property, not so on point. And so after the fact, I ended up working with the team of accountants and such that said, well, we couldn't tell you anything, young lady. You had a plan, and there was no room for us to really, fit in there. But yes, let's talk about agricultural maintenance of the property. Let's talk about agricultural incentives. And long story short, that ended up becoming putting 5 acres under vine, and then eventually turning the vineyard into, after 2 years of selling grapes to other wineries that were making award-winning vineyard designate wine out of my fruit, meaning that they were not blending my grapes with other grapes from another producer. My fruit ended up being so great that they said, we're going to make small batch vineyard designate wine. And then I realized after those 2 years and a bidding war over my fruit that this city girl had folks having a bidding war over my grapes, which just when you say that sounds silly. And I said, but there's something here. And I ended up really working backwards to understand the wine industry, to really unlock the value that I was sitting on that honestly I didn't realize at the time. I knew that the land was valuable, And then one thing kind of became another, and there you have it. At 19 years old, I was a vineyard owner, and while in college, I built the wine brand and the winery and the tasting room, and then ended up opening the business to the public and launching my first vintage of wine in 2007, which was the same year that my son was born. So just suffice it to say, deep, deep, deep curiosity and a high tolerance for risk, and a great appetite for opportunity.
Well, I mean, I feel like we could almost wrap up there with just how impressive that was. A young Lauren at 19 was clearly more refined than a young Ravi Kumar at 19. So I know us boys tend to mature a bit slower, but I definitely wasn't an aspiring investment banker at a young age. In fact, I probably didn't know what an investment banker was, halfway through high school. So that's truly incredible, and I think really summarized the drive that you carried with you your entire life. And at the risk of sounding redundant, I mean, you've been a founder, investor, CEO, advisor, author, I'm going to add now model to that list, and wine owner, all before the age of 40. We constantly have this question of nature versus nurture. Is drive something that is taught, or is it innate? I mean, what do you think fueled your drive and your passion at such a young age?
To be really honest, money. I've always liked money. I know now we are finally in a day and age where women can be unapologetic about the fact that we like money. We like making it, having it, investing it, spending it. I've always really liked money, and not necessarily for the material possessions. I've liked money because I've always seen money as optionality. I have a mother and father who are both self-made. There's no silver spoon. I'm not a trust fund baby. None of that. My father is from Alexandria, Louisiana. He grew up in segregated times. He rode the back of the bus. He was part of the migration of folks to South Central LA, from
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana to Los Angeles, in search of a better life back in the day. My grandma, who both of my grandmothers, may they rest in peace, are no longer with us on this earth, but my father's mother, Grandma Ruby, the home that she ultimately raised my father and his sisters in, she lived through the Rodney King riots back in the day when I was a
Mm-hmm.
little girl. My mother was an Air Force kid, so she had a more stable upbringing, but moved around a lot. And, the stability was through the Air Force, it was through service. And then I saw my grandfather, who is still alive today at 96, bless him. He went from the Air Force and raising kids all over the world. My mom was born in England, her siblings in other places around the world, and then ultimately being stationed actually at Travis Air Force Base, not far from where you used to be based, in San Francisco.
Oh
And then
yeah.
I saw my grandfather go into entrepreneurship by way of owning a farmer's insurance office. And so for me, entrepreneurship, I didn't really understand entrepreneurship, but I did understand the idea of making money for yourself. I did very much understand the idea of making a name for yourself before I understood, entrepreneurship as a thing or innovation as a thing. But this idea of, you have to go kind of grab life by the horns and go get what you want, that's something that was ingrained in me always by my parents. My mom, as I mentioned, she grew up in the Air Force. She also was a model. She took that into communications and public relations within media and fashion. And so I learned so much about grace and poise and style and communication from her. And I learned from my father this idea of being a trailblazer, and from both of them, this idea and this notion of representation before representation was a buzzword, because they were both defying the odds. My mom was a Black model, back in the day. She did Ebony
Mm.
Fashion Fair and Gloria Vanderbilt jeans and all these sorts of things. She was one of very few. My father was one of very few, even though he graduated from UCLA, who took a community college route to UCLA to an engineering degree to an MBA. But it was this idea of resourcefulness at all costs, like no matter what it takes, keep pushing. And the North Star was, what I've always seen them embody, which was make it happen. Like the world's not going to give it to you. It's not going to be handed to you. And so if you want it, go get it. And if no one's going to give you the job, you go make your own. So even me becoming an entrepreneur, I think it was somewhat default, but somewhat what my life was probably destined or designed to be, at least in the beginning. My life and career, as you've mentioned, has really changed and evolved a tremendous amount. But
Mm-hmm.
the topics I was interested in at 19, 20, 21, 22, 25 years old, the companies I was investing in my 20s, even at 30, early 30s, even now, we'll talk later about my SPAC journey. I did that at 36. Everyone's just like, hey, kiddo, like, what are you doing here kind of thing. That's been my whole life. And so for me, it's always been prove them wrong, prove them wrong, outwork everybody, show them that you are more astute. I always took very personally the responsibility of having an opportunity that wasn't given to many that looked like me or that came from the background that I came from. And I've always, again, that deep curiosity I haven't always won. You'll win some, you'll lose some in life and in business, but I have always worked really hard to be, a hard worker, honest, transparent, to raise my hand when I want to do more, to raise my hand when I have the answer, to raise my hand when I don't have the answer, but to always be willing to go figure it out. And luckily, along my journey, there have been incredible people like yourself who see something in me, in my spirit, in the way I carry myself. I speak about this often. Sometimes it's often, the way I raise my children. Like my kids and who they have become are almost my best business card right now for who I am and the integrity that I hold and the way in which I operate, to the point where now, with a son as a freshman in college and a daughter who's a junior in high school, people say to me, "Oh, you run your family like you run a business, huh?" And I said, well, why? They go, "Well, your success rate with your kids is like your success rate in your companies." Thank goodness, thank goodness. But
Yeah.
but that speaks volumes. And so I think sometimes we need the world to see us and our passions and our interest in different ways. I've always been impatient. I won't say I'm not. I have always been impatient. And I think in some ways that really paid off for me because it made me stay up late and learn more and do more and want to accelerate my own timeline. I've never wanted to skip the line. I've just wanted to get there faster. So it's not that I did less work, it's that I worked a lot longer in a more condensed period of time. I stayed up really late nights, learning more, reading more, doing more, preparing more, just so that I could have a higher rate of success.
Yeah, no, and I mean, there's so many parallels in your drive and the humble beginnings to what I discussed with our mutual friend Shannon Nash on our last episode, and how we chose the path of hard work and determination and outworking everyone else in order to find your own path to success. And so there was a panel that I moderated with when you talked about not being apologetic about liking wealth, liking money. Shelley Archambault, who I don't know if you know Shelley, but she wrote a brilliant book called Unapologetically Ambitious. She's on the board of Verizon. She's on the board of Okta. Incredibly intelligent and driven woman. And I just, the title, the stories in that book touch on all of the things that you mentioned, that if you work hard and you earn the spoils of your hard work and you create a better life for the next generation, I mean, you shouldn't have to apologize for that. It's it's a badge of honor, frankly. So I commend you for talking about that, and I think it transitions a bit into the next topic that we were talking about, which is you oftentimes focus on creating opportunities and spaces that frankly weren't available to you early on in your career. What about your experience really drove you to create those spaces for others and effectively paying it forward?
Melody Hobson, who I admire and was really supportive to me, especially when I wrote the first iteration of my book of the Path Redefined 11 years ago. And she said something to me that she's since, said again in several of her talks. But sometimes you have to crouch until you can conquer. And when
Hmm.
she said it to me, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, between one of her Starbucks board meetings as she was meeting with me to talk about her take on the Path Redefined and how she's redefined her path. That was so central to it. It was sometimes you have to play by the rules until you can make the rules yourself. There's a lot of ways to say or articulate that. For me, it has been, I've had to play by the rules and the expectations of society and others and corporations in order to prove myself, in order to get those opportunities, in order to find achievement, not even necessarily success, but just achievement, to build a resume, to be able to go on and do a multitude of other things. And that has there are people that have taken risks on me. There are people who have said, Lauren, I believe in you. And I know that you don't know everything. And I know that you're not also the most qualified, but I know that you are going to be the most well-read and well-researched and hardest working. And I know that you're going to be the most comprehensive in your diligence, in your follow-through, in your follow-up with me. And I rather that than anything else. I can teach you all the other stuff. Or I've had people say something along those lines and then say, hey, my team has all these experts. So anything that you don't know, my people will teach you. And I rather teach you and the way that your mind works than to take a chance on someone else. And so when I find other people who have these inquisitive minds, who have a certain level of willpower and poise and sophistication and diligence and relentlessness and persistence and follow through, those are qualities and characteristics that I deeply value. Because those are the things that you can't teach that. You can't teach someone to wake up and want to win. You can't teach someone to feel like they're failing and still push through hoping for a success with the same level of fervor. That just doesn't happen. You can teach people a lot of other things. You can teach them the ropes. And so when I was early on in my career, there were a lot of very powerful, influential business people who have believed in me deeply, who have supported me in unwavering ways. And I understood the value of their support and the value of that confidentiality in our relationship to maintain that. And I kept, tight-lipped about the work. I was so excited to be there. I was so excited to participate. But that's also why a lot of people, when they look at my journey, it doesn't always make sense to them because I wasn't broadcasting every win. I wasn't broadcasting every new connection. I wasn't broadcasting every fancy dinner or every home I was invited to, right? Because I understood the value of those private spaces. And now fast forward in the last 5 years, especially since 2020, 2019, there's been a shift in our landscape in business. I've achieved more. I don't have to crouch as much. I can conquer a little more. I can open doors for others a little more. But also I'm in a position now where so many of those influential and powerful people who move markets and businesses and run boards and are, have the keys to the city, right? Like the people who have the keys, the people who are the plug are now looking at me and saying, Lauren, it is time you go tell your story. Lauren, it is time that you go, literally I've had folks that have been with me for many years supporting me, working with me, say, hey, you've named our work as such. Like you don't really talk about it, but you talk about the results because that was appropriate at the time. I want you to name us. I want you to name us. I want you to say it. And I want the world to know that you were a part of what we did. And I knew that they were always proud of me, privately, but it was almost like I was their secret weapon, to be honest. And I've also had people say, you are my secret weapon. And now finally I'll share my secret weapon. Or, hey, I'm retiring now. So So part of my 5-year plan is like, we can let everyone know that Lauren Maillian and her company, was the secret weapon behind some of what we've done, or that your insights or perspective have helped us in these transformative ways towards growth and success. And so then I get the opportunity to say, okay, it's not just Lauren now. It's Lauren and the people who have backed Lauren. It's Lauren and the brands who believe in Lauren. And I can say that again and again and again. And really the proof is in the pudding, because now when I have the opportunity, like I did in COVID and the pandemic, to go and take over Digital Undivided, which was very unexpected for me, to go from chair of the board of directors to being unanimously appointed CEO of the organization in a time of, crisis in our country, but also a time of change in our leadership within the organization. I wasn't looking to run a nonprofit organization. I'm so much a for-profit girl, right? But Digital Undivided as a nonprofit is focused on helping women and their businesses become for-profit enterprises. And so there was still a synergy there, even though we as an organization were a nonprofit, because the work was rooted in helping them, have economic development opportunities. That I care
Yeah.
deeply about. And then in addition to that, the doors that I was able to open wasn't just Lauren saying, hey, I can help you solve your problems. I've always done that. It was now, hey, I can help you solve your problems and I can make connections for you and for your business. And that really manifested itself in a beautiful way. And then I was 35 running Digital Undivided and was able to bring in more than 65 corporate partnerships through my relationships, right? And that
Yeah.
was really, to be honest, that was kind of the coming out, if you will, of my years of work behind the scenes was, some people say, watch me work or look at me now or whatever you want to say as a moniker. That was it. That was like, watch me work. Watch all the doors that I can open for thousands of Black and Latino women who Digital Undivided was serving as an organization, because Lauren was not just going to bring herself, she was going to bring her network and others to help champion this cause and to drive greater impact for thousands of women across the country.
Yeah, well, and it's just incredible when you think about that transition from what folks refer to as the imposter syndrome to, the coronation of the years of hard work that you've been doing, let's call it under the radar for all of these organizations, where you're finally able to take credit for it in a moment where it's benefiting so many others, whether it's your work at Gen Y Capital Partners, at Digital Undivided, the new C-suite with Cosmo, or Investor, the Power Series that you did with NASDAQ. I mean, you created so many initiatives that changed the landscape for, women of color, for women in general, for the underrepresented. How has that, how does it feel to play such a critical role in changing the lives for the next generation to where they don't have to struggle, as much or, shatter barriers? I mean, if you ask me, candidly, we still have a long way to go. But at the same time, how does it feel to change that landscape so substantially and devote a significant portion of your career to doing that?
It's my greatest honor. I mean, to be honest, it is a pinch me moment again and again and again. It's long been on my philanthropy legacy board to be able to drive that kind of impact. I never could have imagined that I would do it in my 30s or before 40, and that it would begin and continue so early in my life. And I'm really grateful that it did. It was a defining time in our culture, in our country, and just the wins that I saw those founders go through, and even people that I've helped throughout the years that didn't formally come through the Digital Undivided programs. I mean, there's so much of that I've always done via iMessage and text message and email and in my kitchen and in my living room. And I look back to so many founders, one of them, Jewel Burke. You talk about the Invest Her Power series that I started with NASDAQ Foundation. Jewel Burks is an incredible founder in Atlanta. She has Clap Capital. She started Part Pick before that. Before that, she worked at Amazon, exited her company before that worked at Google, exited her company to Amazon. And I was one of the very first judges at her pitch competition, at a pitch competition where we were able to award her meaningful money at that time. But when she'd come to New York and needed a place to stay, I was the call. I was, the come over, eat, let's chat, let's play out what this pitch is going to be before you go to a big investor meeting. That's priceless, and to be able to see the impact that I've been able to have on so many founders and where they are now. I joke that I wish I could take equity in some of the people that I've been around. Like they're all winners. Like they're all winners. And it's not to say that I picked them. They work really hard. They earn it on their own and they absolutely deserve it. But I also have to give myself a little pat on the back to say I chose to give them my time and my talent, even when I didn't have a lot of time to give and I was raising my kids. And those are the people that went on to win and to win really well and really big, and who are some of the greatest entrepreneurs and investors right now, or the rising stars that everyone's talking about.
Yeah, no, and I think all too often we're in a society that is making things more transactional, right? And, okay, what are you going to pay me for my time? What are you going to do if I do this for you? Where, you were creating what I like to call the goodwill bank of, doing all of that by volunteering your time at a period in your life when you didn't have much to give. And that, even that fraction of time was so valuable to these individuals that, of course, when you're able to be in a position where you're able to tell their story and your story, they're coming out of the woodworks and saying, you were such a critical role in their success and their company's success. So shout it from the rooftops. I think that is definitely the validation. In addition to, yes, I agree, having equity in some of those companies and those individuals is super meaningful. But if we could talk about your book just for a little bit, the Path Redefined talks so much about your philosophy on purpose and success. Without, I guess, giving away the whole story, because we still want everyone to go buy the book. Who did you write it for? What is kind of the gist of your story in your book?
Well, thank you, Robbie. I want to just touch on one thing. Our
Yeah.
time is often, it's like our most precious asset. We say it all the time. We can spend it in a
Yeah.
lot of places. We can invest it in a lot of places. Uh, and I'm so grateful that my time and the investments of my time have been in the right people and in the right opportunities.
Yeah.
With that, The Path Redefined is a book that I wrote initially when I was 29 years old, came out when I was 29. And it was a love letter, if you will. It was a business memoir, but a love letter to every ambitious woman who wanted to get to the top on their own terms, who wanted to rewrite and create their story, who did not want to be defined or confined by where they were born or what their upbringing was or childhood traumas or the limitations of society. It was for the dreamer, the ambitious visionary, but the one who had big, bold ideas and was looking for someone to believe in them and who needed their own battery pack during their time of growth, learning, and transformation. And so this is the current edition of The Path Redefined, and I'm really excited to have it out. And I'll show you again, just like the evolution. This is The Path Redefined, the original version of the book of Little Lauren. And little Lauren was going places. Little Lauren wanted to show up as herself. And this version of the book is the proof in the pudding again. My life has had a lot of ups and a lot of downs. And through these pages, Ravi, I've gone back and learned so much. When I'm in my own times of uncertainty and doubt, and we all have our days, I go back and I read my own pages. There's a lot of other things I read and listen to, of course, but over the years I've gone back and I have reread my own advice to self and others and taken it. And it's an evergreen book. The advice continues to be applicable to me today, to I've had, colleagues say, "Oh my gosh, I understand my daughter now," or "I understand these women on my team who are the rising stars," or I understand this unapologetic drive now in different ways because of the ways in which you told stories and shared your experiences. And if I look back to 2014 when the book came out, and I was 29 years old, I was pinching myself then at how far I had come, especially as a single mother at that time. I was divorced then. I had been left with 2 kids under 2, sole custody of my children. And I was also an entrepreneur. I was turning myself into an investor. I was determined to create a better life for myself and my children. And to 11 years later at 40, be able to have more stories and experiences to contribute to that book, but to still know and be able to say confidently that I still believe in all of the words in this book. Like I still believe everything here, right? I drink my own Kool-Aid in that regard.
Absolutely.
Is powerful. It's really powerful. And where I am today at 40 is the result of me redefining my path again. And so one thing that I wrote about in the book years ago was a term that Reid Hoffman coined called permanent beta, meaning that we are always starting. We should all be in permanent beta. The most successful people are always starting something else. The most successful people I know, I can think of, Mark Lore, he sold diapers.com, which became Quidsi. He sold that to Amazon. He could have sat home. He had something else he wanted to do. He started jet.com. He sold it to Walmart. Then he tapped me to join the board at Walmart. He could have been done. No, he says, I'm going to start Wonder. I want to go disrupt the food industry, right? Like everyone is redefining their path. The most successful people are hungry for more because they have more ideas, whether they need the opportunity, the money or not. That's not the point. You have more that you want to give the world. You have more ideas that you want to test. You have greater visions that you want to see come to fruition. And so the Path Redefined is written for the person who wants to always find what's next for themselves in search for something better. And that's been me my whole life. I don't know where on earth I'm going to be at 50 or 51, another 11 years. Hopefully we'll have another podcast or some other format at that time. And we'll just all go to space together and talk about it. But, I know that my life will continue to transform itself, even from where it is today. And it's only up from here. But there's a certain mindset that gets you to be able to be so resilient, that the mix of resilience, inquisitiveness, and persistence that really drives ultimate success that you can sustain and that can help you get to the top on your own terms, which is, intentionally the subtitle of the book.
Oh, you're using all of my favorite words: resiliency, inquisitiveness. I can ensure our audience that you and I will probably both be in a state of permanent beta in our lives, just the way that we're wired. But I think oftentimes people tend to look at successful folks and think that it's this linear path, and it's not a linear path. There are ups and downs and constant learning opportunities. And I always, try and give folks the benefit of the doubt if I get a sharp response back to a message that kind of caught me off guard. And I'm wondering, what's this person going through today? What have they gone through? Before I bark right back at them, let me just take a moment to reflect and rather than react, and just really try and meet them where they are in that moment. And so using your story to impact the lives of others and giving them a window, I think, into your journey allows everybody to feel a little bit more perfect by being imperfect, if that's a way of describing it. So no, I'm excited. I'll definitely dive into it, and I'm sure if I read your book now and if I read it in 11 years, I'm sure different tools and tricks that you talk about are going to impact me in different ways. So I'm excited to explore it more. But we talked a little bit at the beginning about, taking a SPAC public. So Athena Capital, the all-women team of investors and operators, you later de-SPACed with Ego Mobile. You dealt with the headwinds of the SPAC market and the EV market collapsing. I mean, give us a window seat into that experience, the highs, the lows, the challenges. What was that like?
What didn't I learn in that experience? I learned, I thought I was already quick on my feet, but let me tell you, we all had to be quick on our feet. We all had to have sharp minds. We all had to flex muscles that I think were new for all of us. And I was the baby of the group. I remember when I had the invitation to join the group early on as an investor, and on the team. And I was just happy to be there. It was one of these pinch me moments. Like, I'm just happy that I'm even being asked and considered. I'm just happy that you want me to sit at the table with you. And I remember then realizing a couple of things. In the very beginning, it was, wow, this is incredible. Through that process, working with White & Case as our lawyers and Citibank as our underwriters and going public on New York Stock Exchange, de-SPACing on NASDAQ, you can't learn that. You can't learn that in school. You need real life experience to be able to understand what we went through. And again, I was the baby of the group. I was the youngest one of the entire group, with incredible, incredible co-investors who were some of the most powerful, influential, smart, awesome women in the world globally. And through that, it was a roller coaster of, yes, emotions. Yes, we all had personal money of our own, personal capital on the line. But it was also, this sense of excitement to have been invited finally to do something that had been historically seen as the boys' club. I've never been so excited to just be able to participate, and to know that there is going to be learnings no matter how the deal shook out for us. And, while we didn't, as you mentioned, we had the headwinds of the EV landscape and everything else that was going on. It was our responsibility to make it work as investors, and had the public capital markets looking at us as we did so. And again, even though it didn't ultimately pan out as we wished, we did our job as a group. We band together, and we were able to successfully de-SPAC that company. And by the hair of our chinny chin chin, we made it happen. We even got the EV itself and a prototype, or actually a real car, into Times Square, all the way from Germany, in time for us to go public, to take pictures. That was a priceless moment, and it can't be learned any other way than rolling up your sleeves and doing the work. And what I also learned in that experience is that, of course, you see some of the greatest investors in the world, Silicon Valley, New York City, Austin, Texas, London, wherever they might be, but they lose too. They don't win on every deal. Yeah. And the response that I got from the market was, you can't win them all, kiddo, and it wasn't from the women that I was getting that response. It was from my male counterparts that I was not working with on this particular deal, who knew that I was entering the SPAC environment, and who, wished me well, but were also so excited to see me take another type of risk. And even though that didn't work out, ultimately, after the fact, after we successfully de-SPACed within that lockup period, it showed the market and it showed my network a different sort of tolerance and aptitude that I have, and a different sort of appetite that Lauren Maillian has as an investor, and a different way that Lauren also responds to down markets, and a different way than anticipated, especially I think as a woman, that Lauren responds to a loss. And so I joke that it's, my very expensive, I didn't go to business school. So that could have been business school. That could have been business school right there with all that money. Yeah. But it's, it's an opportunity to say that now I have been able to go from angel investor to institutional investor to VC, PE, and then ultimately the public capital markets before 40. And I'm still the youngest one to ever do it. And no one can take it away from me.
No, and there's so much on the job learning. I mean, 100% of you've got an MBA from the School of Hard Knocks, and going through a de-SPAC at a really challenging time, and thinking on your feet, all of the skills that you had built leading up to that moment. At Connor Group, we've taken 265 companies public over our 20-year history. So we know that, and I think this came up in an earlier episode, that even these unicorn, decacorn companies that we're taking public oftentimes have, some dressing that needs to happen underneath the hood in order to get them public company ready. So, what did you learn through that process of truly making a company public company ready, such that at least the factors that you could control of, financial systems, processes, excluding macroeconomic and, broader SPAC factors and regulatory factors, what was that process like of truly getting a company public company ready?
That's a really interesting question. Two things. One was what I realized, about companies, even though I had been intimately connected to so many of them for a long time, especially the ones we were looking at. So that I'll get to that in a moment. But what I realized first is that so many companies aren't prepared for the big opportunity. So if the big opportunity comes, and it is to go public via any vehicle, direct listing, SPAC, what have you, so many of these amazing companies are so busy, getting to revenue numbers, making their VC investors happy, prioritizing their marketing, prioritizing, lowering their customer acquisition costs, other things that are very fundamentally important to their business. But so many of them fail to prepare by having audited financials. And the amount of companies that we were interested in where they weren't prepared because they didn't have audited financials. They had everything else in order. And, maybe the audited financial process was going to be fairly simple, all things considered, but still take some time because they had their books in order, but they weren't doing the next step to be prepared for what could be an incredible exit, right? and they all were so focused on growth, growth, growth. But it was actually, when you look at it, it was very short-minded. It was like in this very short-term cycle of like growing now. It was very, our end of year numbers are this and our next year projections are this, but we don't have audited financials. And it was, it was unfortunate to see that and to learn that. So this is something, it used to be back in the day that I would tell founders, especially in the startup world, about, life insurance and estate planning and things of this nature, just to prepare them for the future. Simple things, right? And I'm not a financial advisor by any means. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a CPA. I'm by no means giving any kind of qualified advice. But again, this is school of hard knocks advice. These are things I learned the hard way, learned backwards, learned because I was inquisitive and I asked a question that someone thought I was in over my skis on. Arguably, the way that I've had my estate planning done and complete since I'm in my 20s as a single mom, and now I'm remarried to an awesome man and in another stage of my life. But arguably, people told me even then, Lauren, gosh, your estate planning is like, it's very sophisticated. But for me, it was like, well, why would it not be sophisticated? Because I have a plan on going somewhere. Like I have a plan on having things of value. I have a plan on having, a multi-asset portfolio that's meaningful. And so I'm going to prepare for that now. And so I wish that I could see more companies when they talked about growth and success, that it included audited financials and other things, because when that big opportunity comes knocking, they're not prepared for it. So that was one thing. The other thing that I realized within the process of the SPAC was, in the very beginning, I was just so happy to be, and as I said, invited to be at the table, to be in the filings, to see my name in the actual financial filings, to be able to write my name on the wall after ringing the bell in Sharpie. And I wrote my kids' names too. You can write your name at Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
Lauren, Jane, and Chloe. I was like, we were all here. They were there in spirit. They were there on the Zoom screen. But what became really interesting is that though I was the baby of the group, a lot of the companies that we were interested in talking to, because our SPAC was focused on the consumer sector, my career has been focused on the consumer sector, so many of those companies were founders that I've known from early on, that when I was exiting my winery or in my very first business, I saw them starting. I knew them through Gen Y Capital. I had seen them come through our diligence process. We had looked at them. We had been introduced to them. I was, managing the fund. I had some sort of connection, if not direct connection, 1 degree of separation away from being able to get to these founders. And so many of the other people that were part of our investment group had relationships with these companies, but by way of more institutional relationships that were super buttoned up. They knew their board members, they knew their lawyer, somebody went to school with their CFO, somebody knew, again, someone on their board. And there was Lauren, like, I might not know all those other people, but I know the founder. I know the co-founder. I know the 5th employee, right? I know the day one person that's within that business, and I'm on a texting basis with them, or I've got their Gmail email from back in the day. Like I might not have had their business email, but I got their personal Gmail that they're still using, or it's connected to iMessage if I don't have their phone number, or I do have their phone number, or they're my Facebook friend, for goodness sakes, like literally, right? Like I'm connected to these people. And I never would have imagined that I could have been so helpful in the way that I was to Athena, where I thought that that was just going to be me grateful to be there, soaking up information and knowledge as a sponge. And it actually became, and as the market shifted, as you said, it was really hard to get to founders because their boards were like, no, we're not entering these conversations. And so some of our meetings would be, as a team, hey, we know that our interest isn't even getting to the end decision maker. We can't even be as persuasive as we'd like to be because their board member says they're not even entertaining these conversations in this market, right? Yeah. Regardless of what we offered or what our team was able to provide in terms of added value. And so even if it was just the market was wild. So it was like, come on, just hear us out, right? Like, look at what we bring to the table. And I was able to make those connections, not to all of the companies, but to a bunch of the companies. And to say, hey, look, like Lauren would help us have this opportunity to even be able to explore talking to some of these businesses. Yeah. So I'd come up with ideas and the team would go, well, do you know them? I'm like, well, yeah, I do. That's why I'm bringing it up. And so that was like an unlock for me in my personal and my professional development that, even if you don't have, I don't have an Ivy League degree. I do not have an MBA. I went to FIT, for goodness sakes. I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology. I graduated at the top of my class, magna cum laude, in international trade and marketing. Why on earth would you think that Lauren Maillian, who again, didn't live on campus, wasn't in a
Yeah.
sorority, didn't have an experience of corporate rotational programs and blue chip Fortune 500, 150 companies, that I know these people, or that I can be so instrumental and valuable to helping to take companies public simply because of the relationships I had with people, and those
Mm.
people being the founders and the decision makers. So that was like a really big, an eye-opening time for me to say, wow, who knew that the market was going to turn in this way? Meanwhile, I'm just there taking notes for like the first several months. And then it was like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
I need to raise my hand and say I can text somebody. And that was like the golden ticket, at least to helping us explore other deals. And so that was really key for me to see in action.
Yeah, no, I mean, one, I think, someone's network is quite possibly one of the most valuable resources in this day and age, and who you can call upon in times of need. The other point that I want to, touch upon that so eloquently put is just the need for audited financials, and not just completely ignoring, accounting, finance system, taxes, treasury, like the less sexy part of the IPO process can oftentimes be the most painful part of the IPO process. And I swear, by about late 2020, before the market started turning, I would meet all of these founders and CFOs of companies that had a lot of SPAC interest, and literally I could lead off the calls by going, hey, let me guess, you've got a lean finance team, you're on QuickBooks, you've never been audited, or you're audited by a local CPA firm. Revenue is, you're starting to get traction, but it's kind of a hockey stick projection with the right amount of capital. And they asked me if I had seen their pitch deck, or they asked me if I had talked to one of their board members. And I said, no, I've just had a lot of conversations with companies that are, trying to go public, that, may not have any business being a public company. Because we oftentimes use that analogy of, well, the IPO or DSPAC is the wedding, right? But being a public company is the marriage, and everyone wants to have that successful marriage. And yes, you can prop up these companies to be public, but yes, you need the revenue. Yes, you need money in the door to pay for G&A, right? Because the accounting is not the tail wagging the dog, but it still can be very problematic. And so the companies now that have had the opportunity to, as the IPO window starts to reopen, and we've seen more traction in 2025, hopefully we see the government reopen in the not too distant future. Those companies have really invested in doing mock earnings calls, updating their model, meeting with analysts, getting their financials ready, getting the key hires on the team, bringing in the right advisors, and they're using this time strategically to get their companies public company ready. Those are the ones that will have hopefully a thriving marriage as a public company, versus just focusing on that wedding day. But I also wanted to talk. You've served on several boards, including Walmart's board of disruption. What, the role of a modern board member has changed so much, I think, over the last decade or so. What do you think are the, let's call it, the top three qualities of a thriving board member, of a private or a public company today? And we can also throw in a strategic advisor. What makes those individuals so successful?
I think advisory and board service, it ultimately comes down to the quality of your contributions and what you were being asked to contribute.
Mm-hmm.
I have always been asked to contribute around innovation, problem solving, and opportunities for growth, like new opportunities for growth, and unlocking that for businesses, for brands, whether that be new lines of business, new geographies, territories, new products, new pricing models, you name it. That is the way my mind thinks by default, because I'm curious. I'm curious to know the customer journey. I'm curious to know the product journey. I'm curious to know, there's a lot of ways to make money, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just revenue. You can save money and make money, okay? You can cut down on costs and make money, right? And you can also drive revenue. And when you do both, then you really have an unlock, right? And if you do both with great people, and you're incentivizing your team, and you've got great performance, and I deeply believe in performance compensation for myself and for others. I believe in incentivizing people to want to do well and to be aligned with the successful outcomes that you're looking to achieve. And when you can help leaders understand, cultural shifts, market shifts, dynamics that they don't control, especially when they are sitting somewhere in a corporate office, or when they're spending, most of their time and career flying 200, 300,000 miles a year. I had someone say to me, look, I'm really tapped in at the highest levels, but I do not have boots on the ground. And Lauren, somehow you're tapped in at the highest levels and you have boots on the ground. That was about 15 years ago that someone said that to me. And that has been the cornerstone of who I am, Lauren Maillian, and how Lauren Maillian helps to drive growth and find opportunity. And, through innovation or whatever it might be, however you want to look at innovation more broadly, it's all of those things. It is the constant pursuit of new opportunity for growth. And it is understanding that businesses and the economy and the marketplace and the industries that we operate in are going to always change, that it is an iterative dynamic that is always evolving. And, while you can say, well, traditional businesses are great, like, yeah, they are great, right? But what's traditional? Even the most traditional companies that might sell the same classic products, market them differently, speak to a different consumer, say something a little different. Maybe the product is the same and they've changed the packaging. They've certainly upped the way that they deliver their goods to you, right? What used to be done in a shopping bag with tissue paper is now done in a really thick, beautiful box. Now it may be done in a really beautiful, sustainable box, right? Like, something has to change, right? It's not that all things have to change, but being in a position to be insightful enough, astute enough to determine what needs to be, to isolate what's working and what's not, to be able to consistently help businesses and brands find that unlock on a global scale is what I've always contributed. And it's what I love to do, because that's what keeps it, constantly changing. That's why my business and my work is never the same every day, because something's going to change. We're going to wake up and the weather's going to be different. Like, something's going to happen. And this is an interesting analogy, but an example of this that was very formative for me as an entrepreneur was with my vineyard and winery. Now, imagine this. And I want you, hopefully your listeners will imagine this just like this. Virginia, where I had my vineyard and winery, we would have something called bud break. Every winery, every vineyard has bud break, which is literally when your grapes start growing on the vine. Now in Virginia, you'll often have bud break, and 50% chance you have a snowstorm or a very cold day, or you have frost after bud break. If you have frost after bud break, your crop is finished for the entire year. Nothing's going to grow, therefore you have no business. It's out of your control. Well, it's somewhat in your control, but in natural terms, it's out of your control. Now, this happened first year in Virginia. I said, oh my gosh, what do we do? Well, what did some of the other vineyards and wineries do? They took metal trash cans. They made fires in metal trash cans, and they called in helicopters to fly over the vineyard and winery to create warm air to ward off the frost, to ensure that even though the snow was coming, they didn't jeopardize the quality of their crop, and their bud break was still intact. That for me was the most hands-on approach to like archaic problem solving ever known to man, right? Like, you have to find metal trash cans to make bonfires, and to find a helicopter and or a blower of some sort, or big fans, to simulate a warm environment to save a year's worth of your business's revenue. It was like the most, and I was a city girl from New York City, right? Down there, it was like this vision of like a beautiful vineyard and winery and having a glass of wine. And it was like, oh my gosh, if you only knew all the things we'd have to go through to make sure that you get wine in a bottle. Forget insects and pesticides and herbicides, right? But this idea of like, I have solved some of the toughest problems that are like intellectually mind-bending around privacy and finance and opportunity, but I've also been asked to solve and forced to solve some out of the box, who could ever imagine this? Like, I can't tell this story to many people because it'll sound so ridiculous, but like, when you've been in a position to solve all sorts of problems like that, some that are like very hands-on and deemed archaic and old school and odd and like agricultural in nature, but then you've also been put in positions to solve issues around technology and internet connectivity and financial gateways and making sure your people can actually pay you for products and services, and
Yeah.
import and export deadlines, and products stuck on pallets in other countries and sitting in ports. Like, there's kind of no problem that I have not been asked or required to solve throughout my career. And I think that creates all the value for who you are and what you can contribute when you're in a role of advisory or being a board member, especially when you're advising a CEO or a C-suite leader at the global scale. And so some of these stories, might sound cliche or silly or inapplicable, and they all matter because they all show a different way to show up in a time of crisis that can't be underestimated and can't be undervalued.
It's permanent beta, like you said at the outset of the podcast. Well, I know we're coming to the end of our time, which I mean I think it's just absolutely flown by with your amazing stories, and I want to touch on something briefly as well as the question that I end each episode with our guests. Of the first part of that question is you've said that this is reflective season, not reinvention, but just recognizing your 2 decades of work in your career. So just wondering, one, what fulfillment looks like to you for this next, let's call it, chapter of your career, because these are constantly evolving. And then lastly, the question I've asked all of my guests is that success has trade-offs. It requires sacrifices, and it's sort of that advice you tell your younger self. But if you could do it all over again, would you do it exactly the way that you've done it, or would you do something different? So maybe that 2-part question to wrap us up.
I'm going to answer the second one first. If I could
Yeah.
do it all over again, the only difference that I would make is I would worry less. I spent a tremendous amount of time worrying that took up mental real estate that I could have been investing somewhere else. I spent a lot of years worrying for a lot of reasons, worrying if it would work, worrying if I would be successful, worrying about, what my success rate would be, how many hits, how many misses I would have, especially when I entered the VC landscape and everyone was talking about the barbell effect. I spent a lot of time thinking about, what's my barbell going to look like? And I should have, and there's also other risks that I should have taken. And I probably would have taken them if I wasn't overthinking so much and worrying so much. I'll never forget I had the opportunity from Joe Lonsdale to invest in Oculus, and I didn't because it seemed too big, too bold. Joe was doing it, so I probably should have done it, but I wasn't yet in that, well, let me just, over years it would be, hey, well, if I don't understand it as much, but I really trust the people that are bringing me in and I'm inquisitive and I'm curious, I'll make the investment, but maybe I'll make a smaller investment. I should have made even a smaller investment in that company instead of saying no. But it was all rooted in worry. It was rooted in worry on if I was picking the right winners. It was worry about my barbell effect. It was worried about just so many things that were ultimately out of my control. But I think if I had known that it would all end up okay, I would have worried less and worked differently. My work and the way I showed up in my work would have been transformed as well. So that's what I would do different. And what brings me fulfillment is the opportunity to provide the most incredible life possible for my children and the opportunity to hopefully give them the most incredible example of hard work and integrity and vision. And I'm very open and transparent with my children about everything: assets, finances, opportunities, investments. My kids are under legitimate NDA. And within my company and my opportunities, they truly are. And they have roles within the business. They have real roles within the business, and they have incredible minds. And especially over the years, as I'm looking at things within Gen Z and Gen Z sports and joining Overtime and investing there, and looking at media companies and a lot of different things where the mind of a Gen Z consumer is important to me. The mind of my children as the ideal Gen Z consumer or user of a product or service or application is really valuable to me. I am really fulfilled by the opportunity to show them that whatever you put your mind to is possible.
I'm going to try and onboard your advice of not worrying about my kids, about career and everything, and just try and take it in stride and treat it all as a learning opportunity. But Lauren, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm excited to see, what's next, what continues, and I'm really thankful to, have you as a very important part of my networks.
And to care about my story and sharing it with your listeners means a lot to me personally. So thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for your interest in who I am and for tracking my career and where it might go in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's truly our honor, Lauren. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.